Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. Now, as regular viewers of this podcast on YouTube would note, we have a new look. It's the same studio, but everything is changed. We have a round table that we are made of decent wood. Kmart, I believe, is where we got it from. We're calling Arthur the round table. See what we did there. This is the revolution in broadcasting we have been speaking of for weeks, if not months now. I'm going to introduce our two co-hosts to get their views on this new studio. Benjamin Foster, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Very privileged to be part of the aviation commentators of the round table.
And Jake Nelson, how are you?
I'm very well as well, thank you, Adam. I don't know which of us is Lancelot and which one's Galahad.
It is very impressive because this looks like much more intimate, like we can have more of a chat. I won't be standing up as well. So the whole thing works a lot better. And I do have to give a shout out to our the genius that made this happen. I've actually got his LinkedIn up here to get his like full job title. This is Momentum Media's new-ish social media strategist and producer, not the Dread Enoch, but in fact a man called Jordan Kremers-Taylor, I think is his name.
Round of applause for Jordan.
Yeah,
for
his
his
done a
initiative.
very, very good job. He's done a very, very good job. Now, there's a legend behind Jordan because apparently Jordan just turned up one day in the offices and we gave him a job. Like he just turned up. He literally saw there was a job going, just walked in. And most people starting in this role, right, what they would do, they'd come in, ease their way into the job. Not Jordan. He comes into the studio and goes, it's rubbish, we can rebuild it. We can rebuild it. But next thing we know, legend has it, he's driving some big truck down to IKEA. He's just bought the table. He's bought we got some plant life back there. So this is very, very rare as well. This is very rare. It has to be watered twice a day.
There's got the between two ferns sort of look to our YouTube followers.
We've just got the one screen now, which you can actually see properly. So it's very good. It's very good.
State of the art.
Jordan.
State of the art. Thank you, Jordan.
Apparently there was a strange woman lying in a pond distributing swords and Jordan just happened to get one of them.
Well, he was. I've heard he's actually a water polo player. Back in the day, I heard this.
I heard he used to be a male model as well.
Jeez,
I don't know if that's true.
If I only get to meet this Jordan
We'd
one
never
day.
meet him though, because much like with
maybe
Dread
he's
Enoch,
more of a figment of the imagination.
Well, you know, like how the Dread Enoch lurks in the air vents. Maybe he's in the basement somewhere.
Or maybe he's just so radiant that none of us can gaze upon his visage, lest we be blinded.
Yes, of course, because he's a very good man. He radiates goodness, and we're all very bad people.
The great Jordan.
The great Jordan. They got a new character now on the show.
Huzzah.
Right, now, before we go into any more into the serious news stories, we do have lots and lots of shout-outs and announcements. The biggest one we have is that as we prepare this, we are preparing for our kind of sister event, which is the Australian Space Summit. Now, you might be thinking aviation and space. It's all aerospace. It's not on the ground. But there's a lot of people that will be listening to this and watching this who are working in companies that do both aviation and space, or they're working across them. And you should absolutely consider coming along. It is at the ICC next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. And we have an extraordinary lineup of headliners, including Virgin Galactic, who are flying in from the US, and they're going to be talking about their first commercial space mission with with representative from the Italian Air Force, the astronaut who was on board. We've also astonishingly got the Undersecretary of the US Air Force, and for those of you that aren't aware, this is one of the most senior people in US defense, essentially from the White House. So definitely come along. There'll be lots of aviation stuff you can take back to.
$205 billion.
$205 billion. That's almost as big as our budget for the year, isn't it?
It's expensive summit, I'll tell you that.
I think this table was somewhere in the six figures, but there was definitely a couple of decimal points involved.
But definitely, if you want to go along to that, go on to Google Australian Space Summit Exhibition. We call it OzSpace 24, and we'd love to see you along for that.
And we've got our Space Awards that night as well.
We certainly do. It is too late to enter the Space Awards, but if you're coming down to the summit, you want to have a night out in the kind of the night in between, definitely come along. Definitely come along and check that out. We also closer to home, have our Australian Aviation Awards and our Australian Aviation Summit. Now, the most crucial thing I have to tell you is that the Australian Aviation Awards, if you want to submit, if you want to nominate, that is closing, we think, at the end of next week as we record this. So you've still got time. We've got categories for individuals. We've got categories for companies. Pretty much, if you work in aviation, there is something you can go for. And you can either go on the website and submit yourself, or you can click the nominate button. And basically what that does, if you think someone's deserving, they will get an email kind of prompting them to enter. It's a nice little gesture, but go and check that out. It's getting bigger and bigger every year. And during the day before the awards take place, and I will get you the exact
29th.
Day. It's the 29th. Yes, I should know that.
No.
It's the 29th of August at the Start in Sydney. So during the day, we will have our first Australian Aviation Summit. Ben.
Extremely, extremely excited to have this, and extremely excited to announce that we are partnering with our principal partner, Leidos.
Leidos. Thank you, Leidos.
Thank you, Leidos. Absolutely ecstatic to see this coming to fruition. It is going to be a fascinating insight. Really, if we didn't take this opportunity to marry all the attendees to the awards, we'll have to wait till the next year. But no, we've grabbed the plane by the horn, so to speak, or the wings, but are really, really excited. We also have two other partners coming on, Google Wing, who will be speaking across more of the drone, the revolution that's taking place in Australia. And we do have co-piloting consulting, which is another SME that is looking to really get its name out there. Helps much more with driving leads and marketing capabilities along social channels and whatnot, particularly across businesses that are looking to get more aviation business, essentially. There are details on our website.
Thank you to all of our partners, because they're the ones that allow us to put these events on. If you are a business thinking of partnering with us, what's your email? Presumably it's just ben.foster, isn't it?
It's actually benjamin.foster at momentummedia.com.au. But that being said, it is such a fantastic opportunity to bring your business. We'll be having some massive speakers soon to be announced, but it's also a great opportunity to go through and really from a networking point of view. And that's what we do at Momentum Media in Australian Aviation.
But one of not the problems, one of the difficulties with aviation, unlike other industries, is it's so spread out. And for that reason, the industry doesn't often get a chance to come together. This is one of the biggest reasons we launched the Australian Aviation Awards. Obviously, it's great to recognise achievement, but a lot of people come along because they want to network, they want to meet people, they want to celebrate what they've done this year. So the summit will be very, very similar. And the idea is that the summit will tackle the kind of big industry topics of the moment. And we're having a kind of a formal launch, I think, next week. But we will be looking at how we solve our workplace problems. Obviously, we've still got a terrible sort of skill shortage post-COVID. We'll be looking at sustainability. We'll be looking at diversity. We'll be talking about the aviation green paper, which is becoming the aviation white paper. So this is essentially the federal government's framework for the pathway aviation should be on till 2050. So we're going to talk about what was good about it, what was bad about it, what people want to see covered. So all the big industry discussions are going to take place there. So keep your eyes peeled. We will launch a proper website imminently. And you can sign up and come on board.
Absolutely. So excited to do that. And really, really excited to have people partaking on panels. Thought leadership is such an important thing to the Momentum Media and Australian aviation audience. So please do not hesitate to reach out to Adam or myself or even Jake. And we look forward to really putting on what will be a fantastic summit. And
yes, you can head to australianaviation.com.au to find out more. On that note...
Yeah, well, I mean, on the subject of scheduling, why don't we start there? Now, long-term followers of Australian aviation may have been following our coverage of the BITRA reliability data over the past however many months, tracking the on-time performance of airlines, arrivals, departures, cancellations, that sort of thing. Now, for the better part of 2 years, Qantas has essentially been claiming victory over Virgin every month for about 19 months. But they were knocked off their perch this month by Virgin Australia. In April 2024, the official data showed Virgin above Qantas in on-time departures, on-time arrivals, and cancellations. Clean sweep of the three categories.
Trifecta.
Also matching or beating the long-term average in all three areas.
And that's really, really important you say that there, because effectively what happened kind of post-COVID is that we saw reliability was still a long way off those pre-COVID numbers. And particularly we had some absolutely awful months. I think in 2022, looking at the winter there, we had some of the worst months for delays and cancellations on record. We've had a big push from Qantas, Virgin, all the big airlines to improve the reliability by basically having more kind of what they would call capacity in reserve, which is essentially more aircraft and more staff that are ready to pounce when things go wrong. But as yet, we rarely have seen airlines get close to those kind of 2019 figures. So for Virgin, this is a great breakthrough. One, to beat the old enemy, and secondly, to get to that point where they can say, we are really getting back to normal now.
Yeah, so just to crunch the numbers a bit, on-time departures in April for Virgin, 82.1%. This is compared to Qantas and QantasLink. So Qantas and QantasLink, Bitra measures them combined and separately. We're looking at the combined figures here. Qantas and QantasLink combined 79.9% on-time departures. On-time arrivals, 81.2% for Virgin. So that's 79.0% for QF-designated services, Qantas and QantasLink. And 1.7% cancellations compared to 2.3% for QF. Virgin also came out above Rex in on-time arrivals, but Rex still beat them in on-time departures and cancellations. Comparing these to the long-term averages, you've got 82.1% on-time departures, 81% on-time arrivals, and 2.2% cancellations. So that's the long-term average. Performance overall across all the participating airlines still below, but it is sort of approaching getting back up towards long-term averages.
Even towards the end of last year, I believe Catherine King, the Transport Minister, if I remember rightly, she released some kind of like a statement to the media where she basically said, I understand why passengers are angry that we're not seeing the reliability what it used to be. So to be fair to airlines, it's taken a lot of stick. They have begun to turn things around. What they need to do now is get this to be much more consistent. It's sort of popping their head above the line, but they need to be doing this all year round.
Absolutely. So that's by the way, those airlines in question that Bitra measured for that month. If you were curious, Hinterland, Jetstar, Qantas, QantasLink, Rex, Skytrans, Virgin, and Virgin Regional. Bonza was not on the list for the first time since November. Now, that is despite the fact that Bonza was flying right up until the end of April.
Okay, welcome back. So we spoke a little bit before about on-time performance, and that, Bonza has now been kind of extracted from the expunged from the official figures. But obviously Bonza is in this bizarre situation at the moment as we record this, where Bonza is in administration. However, the administrators have not liquidated the airline. They have not given up. They are speaking that there is hope an interested party could come in. So we're recording this now, Jake, on Tuesday afternoon. Where are we now? What's the kind of up-to-date situation with Bonza?
So currently Bonza is remaining grounded through at least I believe next Tuesday. They are still looking for a buyer, still looking for planes. There is now only one of Bonza's original MAX 8 fleet left in Australia. That is VHUJK Sheila.
I love the names.
True blue, man.
Great names. So, Shazza, VHUJT, left on Monday, I believe. So that's just leaving one of the original Bonza MAX 8s still in the country, which is not fantastic for if they want to get flights going again. They do need new planes. In terms of the progress on finding a buyer, that is still sort of up in the air, as you say. There were reports from the creditors' meetings that about 20 parties were interested in buying the airline, 6 parties very interested. One of those parties was Vietjet, the Vietnamese low-cost carrier, but they pulled out of talks. So I don't know if they were in the 20 interested parties or the 6 very interested parties. But it seems like, until we hear otherwise, there seems to be a very healthy level of interest maybe in purchasing Bonza, because it does have that valuable air operator certificate.
Exactly. So this is what I was going to say. In a sense, that is most of what you're buying now, because they don't have any aircraft. So essentially they had 4 aircraft at the time they went into administration, but they were all leased. And effectively, the administrator came out and said, we really can't do anything to stop these aircraft leaving Australia. So they have now, all but one, have left. Probably by the time this comes out, the final aircraft will be gone. So you're buying an airline without any aircraft. That's the not good. The other thing is obviously they're in quite a lot of debt, both debts from that they owe now, but also in kind of upcoming booked flights. So if you were to buy the airline, even though technically you may not have to take on those debts, it would seem very bad to buy Bonza and let all of those potential passengers lose their money. When Bain Capital bought Virgin Australia, one of the things they did was all the passengers essentially got their money back, all the staff got paid. It was the kind of other creditors that walked away with very little. So anybody that comes in is going to have to will look to honour those, but it's going to be very difficult to honour those unless you've got like for like aircraft replacements. That's the thing. They had this fleet of relatively large 737 Maxes. So another a buyer comes in, probably would be looking to swap those out and put smaller aircraft in. Suddenly then that's a bit of a logistical nightmare. What you were basically buying is the air operator certificate. Now, without wanting to downplay the good people at CASA and the work they do, it is a piece of paper that says, we say you can do this. The other thing you're buying is any remaining staff. The staff at the moment, it seems to me, are in limbo because the company hasn't been liquidated. It's still an active entity. It might not be putting on any flights, so it still exists. And the government have this fair work guarantee, which is a brilliant initiative. We don't have one in the UK. It's excellent, which basically says if you work for a company and it goes under, any money they owe you, the government will effectively pay you, which I think is absolutely brilliant. But obviously, getting hold of that is a time-consuming process. And from what I can gather, that process can't really start until Bonza has been formally wound up. So the staff at the moment haven't got paid for April. At the moment, yeah, exactly. We're now in mid to late May. Mm-hmm. So they're now going to get to the end of May. There's a good chance they're then owed 2 months' salary. And obviously there's going to be a lot of staff, particularly those who maybe aren't necessarily pilots or they're not the higher earning executives there, that won't necessarily have money saved up, that will be living month to month. So these people are in limbo. So they need a deal to happen quickly. As yet, we don't know if or when this is going to happen, Jake.
Yeah, it's a real tricky situation because, on the one hand, you do hope that they can find someone to buy the company and get the airline going again. But on the other hand, if the longer they spend without throwing in the towel, the longer it will take for the employees to get paid. Now, there have been sort of offers of some companies on the Sunshine Coast. There's at least
packages or something.
Yeah, so there's at least one company, a recruitment company on the Sunshine Coast that's been offering to help find part-time or casual or temp work for these, Bonza employees to tide them over while they wait for something to happen. There's also been a GoFundMe, I think that's been set up by the Flight Attendants Union to help out at least the cabin crews. But it's a very tricky and sort of precarious situation that they're in because, and I think the situation as well is that if they resign and take on a position with another airline, they will
forfeit the right to get paid.
Yeah, or something or at least find it very, very difficult to get what they're owed from Bonza.
When you look at, so I looked into the details of this. So the administrator told staff correctly, they weren't being out of order, that if you were to resign your position and take another full-time staff gig at an airline, then it would be a lot less likely that they would get paid the full amount they're owed eventually, because then they would be thrown in with the other pool of creditors. And again, that wasn't the administrators being difficult. That is kind of how the law works. And the administrators are in this really tricky situation because they want to save the airline. In order to save the airline, they need time to find a buyer. Those talks have to happen. And obviously, nobody's going to buy the airline unless it has staff. But for every day this goes on, those individual staff are in more and more and more trouble. So there's almost like a no-win situation. Now, if the administrator pulls this off and they manage to get a buyer come in, then they did the right thing. But obviously, if talks fall apart, or perhaps some of these interested parties aren't quite as interested, then everybody loses out. So they're in a very tricky situation. And this is a very different situation to the one that Virgin Australia found themselves in when they went into administration, because they had their own aircraft that could continue flying. And they were also happened bizarrely at a kind of good point in time, in that you had the kind of
government support.
Yeah, exactly. You had supplemented flights, you had JobKeeper, you had advanced job seeker. So right then, even though it's never a good time to lose your job, right, that kind of was the most insulated period in history for it to happen. But Bonza's staff having an airline without aircraft and now in the worst possible situation.
Well, from my understanding of the situation, and I am no business law person, but from what I've sort of managed, I'm not a number guy. Sure. Okay, I'm not a numberist. But from what I understand of the situation, the problem is that, like, when you go into administration, your accounts get frozen, right? And so, like, you can't get at the money that is in those accounts, and a new account is opened up, for the company in administration, where all incoming funds will go. The trouble is Bonza has no incoming funds because it has no planes. If you don't have planes, you can't fly. If you can't fly, you can't sell seats. If you can't sell seats, you don't have an income. So there's no money available from any incoming funds for the staff to be paid with.
Now, one of the
or any other creditors for that matter.
Now, I would say Jake's a fantastic reporter. He's got some really, really strong escapes and exclusives over the last couple of weeks. The kind of insiders he knows, and effectively the message that is coming out is that Bonza themselves were doing quite well. Even though they weren't necessarily turning a profit or breaking even, they were never going to be expected to do that for a couple of years. They were always going to be underwritten by the 777 partners who effectively owned them. But what are you hearing, Jake, in terms of how well they were doing just before this thing went into administration? Yeah,
so we have a source with knowledge of the situation. This is a credible source who we trust that was saying that before it went into administration, from sort of since it started up in January last year through to when it was suspended in April, it was getting around 70% of
capacity.
It's 70% load factors. Yeah, so they were flying 186 seats 737 MAX 8s, and they were getting sort of 130 plus passengers per flight across those Sunshine Coast, Tullamarine, and Gold Coast bases. The source told us, there were some routes that weren't performing as well as others. Mm-hmm. The majority of routes were performing well. They said that future load factors were very good. The business plan was working as expected. Profitability was in sight. These load factors, these future bookings were trending upwards, and average fares were getting higher as well. Now, caveat. Sorry. One extra thing. The source also told us that Bonza was planning to celebrate flying its 1 millionth customer in preparation for May this year, which is obviously...
It's pretty impressive.
One of the biggest things that's annoyed me, and I think I might have said this on the show before, is a lot of the mainstream kind of media coverage was lots of kind of clever clog know-it-alls being like, well, it was always doomed, wasn't it? But I don't think that was the case. So, again, for those of you not aware, Bonza's kind of shtick is it flew from point to point travel. So it essentially flew from a smaller destination to a smaller destination, or kind of more unusual routes. And the kind of what I'm looking for, kind of legacy players in the aviation industry said that would never work. Australia simply doesn't have a population to support this. Bonza turned around, or Tim Jordan, the CEO, and said, this has worked all around the world, and it's absurd to think it wouldn't work in Australia. And you will only know if it's going to work if you put the flights on. You can have all the clever clogs, running their algorithms or whatever it is. I'm simplifying, but it's only until you put the route on that you stimulate demand and that you will know. And it does appear that they were making a go of it, and it was always going to take them time, and it was always going to be the case that they'd have to be underwritten. But the central premise of Tim's idea, and this was very much one guy's idea, he was making it work. It may have taken a bit longer for them to work out the perfect network, but they were very open in saying publicly, we're almost going to throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, And the ones that do well, we'll keep. The ones that don't do well, we'll take away. And it is inevitably going to take us a couple of years or a few years to get to that point. But they seem to be on that road. And I would say that if you're an interested party, I think there is the kernel of a good idea. Or there's more than that. There is a good idea there. Oh, do you agree, Jake?
One caveat is that for a low-cost carrier, 70% load factors are not fantastic. Jetstar sort of gets, high 80s, 90s in terms of its load factors. So for a low-cost carrier, that's not terrific. But you do also have to consider this is 70% of a 737 MAX 8 186-seater plane being flown between mostly regional destinations. Some of these routes were performing very well, Sunshine Coast to Albury, for example. Some of these routes were performing well above 70%, it's sort of the figure being dragged down by lower performing routes. In your first year with an app-first booking strategy, they had a few factors that were holding them back. So that goes some way to explaining the 70%. And if they were able to lay their hands on some smaller planes like regional jets or Dash 8s or something, they may have been able to, because one of Bonza's constant problems throughout its entire operation was did not have enough planes. So if it had been able to get some of these smaller planes up and running on some of the routes that were not performing well enough to justify MAX 8s, that might have done a bit better for them.
If you had an established international airline or that somebody that had access to this diverse fleet, then you would imagine this could work really well, because some of those smaller routes that they had to cancel because they weren't performing well enough, could actually work really well with a smaller Saab or a Dash 8 or an E-Jet, for instance. And then maybe some of the more popular routes, they could have a bigger aircraft. So there is still, with that air operator certificate, that piece of paper that makes you legitimate, and staff who clearly really like the company, there is potential for somebody to come here and have a go. But at the very least, I don't believe that a lot of these routes are going to disappear. Surely, even though, Virgin and Qantas have their nose at this, why not take over some of them? If there's money to be made, why not see if you can make these work?
Well, the CEO of Avalon Airport, Tony Brunn, has told us that, that there is room for more low-cost competition, and he's sort of, pushed Avalon forward as like, hey, this would be a great place to base your low-cost airline. But he does raise a few good points. I think we'll be talking a bit more about Avalon later on in the show.
Before we leave it there, though,
I do. Speaking of smaller Bonza planes,
yes, that's what I'll get into. This is great. This is one of your best stories. I love this. Go on.
If this is one of my best stories, Adam, I shudder to think which one you think is my worst. But this was something that I sort of spotted almost by accident. This one site, Collectors Aircraft Models Australia, we had a word with them because I noticed that there was a surge in demand, or like these model aircraft, these model Bonza aircraft were almost sold out on this website. So they had 5 models in 1 to 400 scale across 3 brands. We spoke to the owner, Tom Russell. Shout out to you, Tom, if you're listening. Thank you for your help with this. He told us that from January the 1st to April the 29th, they sold 13 Bonza aircraft via the online store. In the 96 hours after it was announced that Bonza was entering voluntary administration, they sold 63 Bonza model aircraft, notably over 25% of which were to addresses in the Sunshine Coast region, suggesting people somehow connected with Bonza, because that is of course, Bonza's main first base.
Well, at least somebody's done well out of the Bonza administration, There's always winners in a recession.
There were no Lego models? Did Lego ever embark on such a thing?
They do Lego Star Wars, not Lego Bonza.
Yeah,
Missed opportunity.
No, it's we used to have sort of long-time listeners will remember we used to have sort of collections of model planes on the tables here. We love the model plane industry here in Australia.
If you do run a model plane shop and you want to send us some, we'd love that.
We love our model planes.
Front and center.
We love our model planes. We love our full-size planes. We would rather have a model plane in here than a full-size plane. I'm sure you will agree.
One final question just on this before I'm sure we go to a break. But what you touched on, Jake, is that Bonza was averaging load factors of around 70% across its three bases. For an aircraft or an airline to actually make profit, does it have to be more than that?
It's complicated.
Yes,
it does sort of depend on how much you're charging, how what your costs are, what the yields are, etc. From the seats. I understand people say from what I understand, like smaller planes can sort of cost more per passenger to run.
One of the things that Tim Jordan, the CEO, said is a kind of a cliche in aviation that an empty seat is like the ultimate perishable good, because once you've taken off, that's money you've just lost forever. In terms of like what percentage of seats you've got to sell, like Jake said, there's no simple answer. If you're running a very expensive long-haul international route, it's not quite as much pressure if you're doing those fast turnaround, low-cost carriers that really need to pack them out. But we've seen some extraordinary load factors. I remember when Qantas started flying from London to Rome, I think it was. Not London to Rome, from Perth to Rome even. They were seeing load factors averaging.
Well, see, one's uphill and one's downhill.
Yeah, we've done that before. They were seeing load factors. I think it was like 98% something. It's one of the highest they've ever seen.
And contrary-wise, Qantas has axed its route from Sydney to Shanghai because it was only getting about like 50% load factors. Half full flights, which is not great. So they've pulled that route and are putting those planes onto other routes where they're more profitable. So there's no real simple answer or equation to how many seats that you have to fill. Obviously, more seats being filled is good. But even still, it's been pointed out a lot on our Facebook page that you could fill 100% of the seats on a plane, but if your fares are too low, then you'll still not be making a profit. So it's not like a one hard and fast golden rule.
Sure.
Okay, welcome back. So unfortunately, during the break, we appear to be a man down. Benjamin Foster has left us.
There was this radiant light through the door, Adam, and all I could see was a figure silhouetted with a blade upraised, and Ben just rose from his seat as if in a trance and followed it. So I think we might have actually had our first appearance of Jordan the Great.
It's interesting because I actually heard a kind of gospel choir singing in the background.
It was just almost like a
blinding
hum.
light. Yes, it was a blinding light. So he's gone. Probably won't see him for another few months, like the last time he vanished.
We really need to do something about the various supernatural entities that inhabit the Momentum Media offices. This is getting out of hand.
Yes. Right. What are we talking about next, Jake? What other news is happening that we should be addressing?
So we touched a bit earlier on about, things getting back to normal in the domestic aviation sector. One sort of piece of evidence that's come out today is this ACCC report. The ACCC has been resuming the monitoring of domestic aviation competition in Australia, and they have come out with this new report finding that passenger levels and capacity are finally getting back up to pre-pandemic levels. So in the latest report, in March 2024, passengers that flew with Qantas, Virgin, Jetstar, Rex and Bonza were at 98.8% of March 2019 levels. Seat capacity also just below pre-pandemic figures. Additionally, in February, domestic passenger levels went above pre-pandemic for the first time since the pandemic, which the ACCC sort of ascribed to major entertainment events like the Taylor Swift tour.
Hang on a minute. Are you telling me that we've been trying to get that post-COVID, we're trying to get to the point where we've overtaken, and we've struggled and struggled and struggled, and then Taylor Swift comes here and she has solved all our problems? Is this what you're insinuating?
I think from what I hear about Taylor Swift, she's capable of solving a lot of the world's problems, Adam.
She's almost like one of the mythical creatures that lives in this studio, isn't she?
But yes, her concerts in Melbourne and Sydney, and also this WWE wrestling event in Perth, those were among the factors that sort of pushed the passenger levels up.
So wrestling and Taylor Swift, who knew?
Who knew?
This is actually what aviation needed.
Who knew is a different artist entirely. I believe that's a Pink song, Adam.
I'm not as familiar with the back catalogue of Pink.
Australians also really love Pink. You know, when Pink came over here, I think it was last year.
I think she was completely off topic. I think she wasn't let into a pub in Manly. I think they were like, "Have you got any ID?" And she's like, "Don't you know who I am?" This is true. Then she was like, "Don't you know who I am? I'm an international artist."
Yeah, just ask any 30-something suburban mum, and she'll tell you. We also had a drop in domestic airfares in March, and an improvement in reliability, sort of harking back to our earlier story. So, good news for the domestic aviation sector.
They've also talked a little bit about the potential of Bonza leaving and the kind of the impact that could have, and what they've essentially said this could be a very bad thing, not just for the lost routes, but for competition as well, right?
Yeah, so they were... Now, Bonza wasn't competing against the majors on a lot of routes. There was only 7 routes where they were sort of competing with other carriers. But what the ACCC has said that Bonza, quote, played a key role in connecting regional hubs across the domestic network. So they had, at the end, when they went into administration, they had 37 domestic routes. 35 of them were to regional destinations. 30 were not covered by any other carrier. And according to the ACCC's figures, from March 2019 to March 2024, there was a net increase of 22 domestic routes. So in March, there were 178 domestic routes in Australia. So Sunshine Coast Airport and Gold Coast Airport would be feeling the brunt of these disruptions because particularly Sunshine Coast Airport, 14 direct connections to 3 without Bonza, and Gold Coast seeing half the direct connections that it would have had. And if you look at, I'm looking at the map that the ACCC has put up of these, routes that were either introduced or cancelled between March 2019 and March 2024, and just the huge web of Bonza routes across the eastern seaboard, and and of course, obviously heading as far west as Darwin. That's quite a lot of routes to sort of lose in one fell swoop.
Yeah, and for airports, it's particularly difficult because before Bonza's arrival or before they launch a specific route, they have to staff up. They have to hire people. Some of them would have had to have invested in their infrastructure, and they were very much planning for Bonza to be here for the long term. So
for the long haul,
yes,
metaphorically speaking,
and now
they weren't doing any long haul.
And now
routes,
they've had the rug pulled out from under them. So now they're obviously as entities owed money, they're creditors. But potentially that puts the staff that work at the airport, potentially it puts their positions in danger as well. As well as kind of, for a lot of, we've spoken about this before, a lot of those communities, they were bringing in the amount of passengers that lived in some of these, towns or cities.
Yeah, there was more. In the first year of operating in some of these places, they were bringing in more people than lived in those towns.
So that is crucial for tourism. That's crucial for the local economy. And if you just turn that off like a switch, that's a disaster.
Yeah. There have been, a few airports that have been saying, Sunshine Coast Airport, Melbourne Airport have both basically said, if Bonza gets off the ground again, we would love to have them back.
Yeah. And that's also very interesting because generally speaking, if somebody owes you money, you don't like them. So they obviously thought this was a good idea and was very crucial to them as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, a lot of the reason why they were able to get, sort of set up with all these airports is because these airports were falling over themselves to offer Bonza these routes, to say, hey, fly to us, we'll give you these sweetheart deals, right? But it's as you said, Adam. If they've invested in new infrastructure, and they can attract new carriers. If Bonza fails but they can attract new carriers with this new infrastructure. It's kind of like the aftermath of the .com bust in the late 90s, early 2000s, where, all of these dot-com bubble companies came up, built all this, infrastructure and then collapsed. But that infrastructure and that code and all of the stuff that they built is still around and, became sort of foundational for the modern internet as we know it. So this infrastructure that they've invested in, if they can attract new carriers, that might serve them still in good stead should Bonza not rise from the ashes.
Yeah, that's that great irony. Having proved these routes could work, having proved everybody else wrong, the irony is that they could lose them and a traditional carrier, like if you're a Jetstar or anything from a Qantas group where they've got a more diverse fleet, they're ripe for the picking now. So
exactly.
The chances are a lot of these routes will continue, even if Bonza itself doesn't.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see. Now, on the subject of of airlines that are in financial trouble and serve very underserved markets. Turning overseas for a moment, Air Vanuatu has landed itself in significantly hot water.
A spot of bother.
A spot of bother.
Yes.
Water hotter than the balmy seas off Vanuatu itself.
This is probably where Jordan would bathe, I imagine.
Possibly, yeah.
Yes.
He may be the reason that the sun shines so brightly there.
Yes.
But Air Vanuatu went into voluntary liquidation last week. To be clear, this is the term being used by Ernst & Young. It's yes, liquidation here is a very final thing, but Ernst & Young is saying voluntary liquidation, and I understand there's some differences in Vanuatu business law, perhaps that's the reason for that. But they've gone into voluntary liquidation per Ernst & Young being the liquidators. And the liquidators have revealed that that airline was at least 99 million Australian dollars in the red when it went into liquidation. It cancelled flights earlier this month, leaving a whole bunch of passengers stranded. I think Virgin was ramping up its services there, and Qantas was advising people who had booked on Air Vanuatu flights. They were saying please call us because Qantas is a codeshare partner of Air Vanuatu. So currently Virgin is the only carrier that is flying from Australia to Vanuatu at the moment. So Air Vanuatu appeared to have 7.6 million US dollars in non-current assets, 73 million in liabilities, for a total deficit of around 66 million US dollars or 99 million Australian dollars. The difficulty that Ernst & Young has been facing is that while there is $24 million roughly in these current assets, according to the liquidators, the financial information that is available from Air Vanuatu is, quote, significantly out of date. So Ernst & Young, as at least at the time we wrote that story last week, don't actually know how much money and, how much of everything Air Vanuatu has because the books are a complete mess. So
this is like when the men in grey suits with their big, thick black spectacles and their briefcases, they turn up there. We're going to come in and sort this out. And I remember when they initially put it...
I'm not an accountant, but I played one on the stage.
When they came in, one of the first statements for the voluntary liquidation was that basically they said that the aim was to get those aircraft back in the skies and get them flying again as soon as possible, because as effectively a kind of a national carrier, that it's a necessary service. This cannot go under.
Yeah, it's sort of it's a really small airline that's somehow too big to fail because it's one of the only carriers that serves Vanuatu. There's like a handful of others that do it, Virgin being one of them, but it's a significant link to the outside world. And it's an airline that mostly has ATRs and other smaller aircraft, and one 737 that has been out of commission since I think March. So it's not a great situation for Air Vanuatu, but it's also sort of a unique situation because if they want Vanuatu to have an aviation industry, they've got to get Air Vanuatu going again.
Well, if they want to have any form of tourism, they need to have their own sovereign
national carrier.
Yeah.
So it's It's an interesting situation, one that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on to see if they can get back in the skies. But it's not a great situation for Vanuatu, certainly.
No. Now that is probably almost all we've got time for. But before we do wrap up, and Jake has hinted at it there, I went to see the performance of Jake Nelson in his last musical.
Well, before we get to that, Adam.
Oh, hang on a minute. Don't do this every week. No!
Well, we did promise the people that we would talk a little bit more about Avalon Airport.
Well, okay, go on.
We did promise the people.
I'm trying to plug your musical.
I'm very grateful, but we can get to how amazing I am.
Yeah.
After
we may not do at this point. Go on.
But we recall, of course, the stoush around Melbourne Airport's rail link. Now, we're sort of catching up on 2 weeks of news here because we were off for the podcast last week. But we had Avalon Airport, the Victorian government has sort of come in and wagged its finger at Melbourne Airport, saying, "Well, if you don't stop buggering us around, we're going to go and build a rail link to Avalon." And Avalon Airport has put its hand up and said, "Yes, bring it on. We would love a rail link."
But the problem is that in this disagreement, I fear, Jake, that you may have eased that disagreement along. You may have prodded the right people here or the wrong people, because you went to Avalon and said, "What do you have to say about this?" And they were like, "Great idea."
Yeah, so Tony Brun, the outgoing CEO of Avalon Airport, who last week announced that he was taking up a new position in Saudi Arabia. Best of luck to you, Tony. He basically said that we could have within 2 years, if we get the go ahead, and if we get the help, we can have a dedicated rail service modelled on the one they have at Luton Airport in London. So basically their proposition is they build a new station on the existing line from Melbourne to Geelong, and there is a quote from Tony, a dead straight road from the terminal to that train station.
No nonsense, I love that.
Using the existing road interchange on the freeway, and we connect it from day one with a bus and or trackless tram. Trackless tram being basically a very long bus.
We've got the rails there, right? They need to soup up the station, and there's going to be a road. So basically, they will bus you to the station, which is not too far away.
Or trackless tram you.
Trackless, whatever, I can't say that. So they're basically, we've been thinking about this for a long time. Seeing as there's some money swilling around and nobody knows how to spend it, we'll have it, and we'll get it on. It actually does make a lot of sense, particularly in that, obviously, we've got Western Sydney Airport, which is obviously going to be on a scale far beyond Avalon. But surely, if we're opening Western Sydney and we're going to say that the New South Wales is going to have 2 major airports, Avalon has the base infrastructure you would need to expand. And
I think it has been served by international low-cost carriers before.
Yeah. So essentially, this is ripe for expansion. They're like, we've got the station there. The biggest issue Avalon has got, for anyone that's been to the air show, is clearly it's a lot further away from Melbourne city centre than the traditional Melbourne airport is, and this is going to be the thing that's holding it back. We have been talking, well, not we haven't been talking, but from what I gather, they've been talking about a train link at Melbourne for 50 years or something.
A very long time.
And it never happens. And I remember watching the press conference, and it was ScoMo and Daniel Andrews, not two people I imagine got on very well, doing the joint press conference during COVID. Wonderful news. We put our differences aside. We're going to get it done. 3 years on, we've not even thought about starting it. In fact, the whole thing's in limbo. This appears to be, on the way I read it, one of these things that's never going to happen. So might as well give it to Avalon. Because the thing with Avalon, they were very innovative during COVID. They're just one of those airports, they've got a kind of no-nonsense, get-it-done mentality. While they're faffing about, just give them the money and they get it done.
Well, it's Tony Brun did tell us, he said we support a rail link to Tullamarine. He said that Melbourne Airport does need a rail link, but he says that there also needs to be a dedicated rail link or a rail service for the secondary gateway, because there is a station that's maybe 10 minutes away, Lara station, but that's not really suitable for what they're after, because you have to go through all the suburban streets to get there. So this direct station would provide a very quick connection to the terminal. And he's basically this is what he said. Direct quote: "We can enable the state government and the travelling public of Victoria and Melbourne to have their cake and eat it. You can get Airport Rail through Avalon in the interim on the path to getting Melbourne Airport and Tullamarines connection done." He said this ultimately gives you 2 airports with competition, which will drive additional capacity, more competition and choice, and that will drive down airfares.
I mean, he's bang on right.
Yeah.
He's absolutely bang on right.
And touching on what he said before, he's basically Avalon's putting up the sign saying, "Hey, if you're a new low cost carrier, or if you're a low cost carrier, or you're any carrier at all, and you want to fly to us, direct." A quote that Tony Brun said to me is like, "We've got the capacity. Fill your boots. We are open for people. We've got a catchment area of 3 million. You can fly in here and be at the footy in no time at all. Something like a huge chunk of Avalon's capacity is serving the city of Melbourne rather than Geelong itself.
I mean, the whole row regarding Melbourne trailing is pathetic. It's like, this is utterly pathetic. Just sort it out. And he makes a good point. If the money's sat there doing nothing, we might as well have it. You can carry on arguing for another 10 years and we'll get it done.
Yeah, it's common Sydney wins. We're gonna have 2 airports, both with rail links. One new airport that's gonna have a rail link as soon as it opens, and meanwhile Melbourne's got 2 airports, none of them connected by rail. So very very common Sydney victory over here.
Yes.
Now, speaking of common victories, I'm now ready to bask in your adulation, Adam.
No, so anyway, Jake is essentially like a kind of a D or E-list celebrity in this town of Sydney. He is actually like he's well respected in the kind of amateurish music scene. It's like, as far as I'm concerned, there's Broadway and then there's Jake Nelson, right?
There is a significant gap between those 2 points.
No, I don't think so. Because Jake actually is exceptionally good on stage. And I went to see him in the Dolly Parton musical 9 to 5. And his character, and I admit I can't remember the character's name, but I do remember you essentially played like the kind of love interest.
Joe was the character's name.
Joe was the character's name, the love interest to one of the main characters. You look fabulous. If that's the right word. You look fabulous. You had your kind of Mad Men outfit. You had your not mutton chops. They're not mutton chops, they're sideburns. You had your sideburns.
Two different styles of facial hair.
It's exactly the same. You had your big sideburns, and he had this really cool like grey suit on, and he had these big thick like Ray-Bans, like 1960s, 1970s, cool as hell Ray-Bans. The whole thing was really, really, really good. Everyone seemed to love it. It was packed out as well, because I went on the Wednesday night, which you would imagine would be the smallest one. Most of the seats were full. Everyone seemed to have a great time. How did it go? Tell the viewers and listeners how it went.
Yeah, look, it went very well. It was a great show to be in. Rockdale Musical Society put on a very professional production. They're doing Cats in November. I probably won't be trying out for that one because it's very far away, and I've politely asked them that if I should ever turn up to another Rockdale rehearsal while I'm still living on the other side, or another Rockdale audition while I'm still living on the other side of the city, to please shoot me. But lovely people to work with, lovely company to work with. The cast was amazing. The crew was amazing. Everyone had a fantastic time, and it was all around a great show, and the audiences seemed to like us.
Oh, well done. I enjoyed going and seeing it, and we will obviously keep you updated on the show when his next performance will be. You're in the auditioning process at the moment.
Yeah, so
your agent is speaking to other people's agents.
My people are speaking to their people. You know how it is. But audition season is on again. So hopefully looking to land something maybe in November in the exciting world of community theatre.
Well, on that note, we will wrap things up. I don't know I wonder what Jordan's doing now. Presumably I'm going to be basking in
creating world peace,
probably.
Solving hunger. Who knows?
Who knows? What's the word we're using for Jordan now? What's the?
Well, I mean, I like Jordan the Great, but we can sort
Jordan
of
the Great.
Jordan the Great, yeah.
Jordan the Great. He created the Round Table.
Yeah, exactly.
Jordan the Great. Well, he's he's obviously metaphorically he's here from Jordan the Great. Thank you very much, Jake, for joining us.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back on this nonsense podcast the same time next week. But for now, from us, goodbye.
Goodbye.